All right, good morning, everyone. It is the appointed hour, so we're going to get started. This is the session on balanced solutions with the three-circle model. My name is Erik Simmons, as you see on the slide, and my contact information is here, so you'll have my email address if there's anything you want to follow up on after our hour together today. This is a fun topic for me and reflects a lot of work that's gone on over the past 15 years of my career. And we're going to focus on solutions. The first thing I want to do is get to ground on what that term means in the context of the presentation today. Generically, you see a solution solves a problem. And since we're in the business context, we can refine that a bit to say that a solution here is an integrated set of products and services that solves a customer's problem. So that's the more economic aspect of this. It's not just generic as you were a math student and x equals 3 and you solved a homework problem. This is a slightly different setting. In fact, solutions here can resolve as well as solve problems. So we don't always get an x equals 3. That's rare these days. In fact, around the sort of complex problems that organizations face with customers and big socio-technical systems. So we introduce here the concept of satisficing. That's a term made popular by Herbert Simon, a Nobel-winning economist. Middle of last century, he published some papers and books talking about satisficing, which is achieving the minimum requirements to satisfy a goal, rather than seeking some optimal solution. And we do this all the time. The smartphone you have is a satisfied solution. You viewed some phones. You probably didn't go off and look at every single possible phone and evaluate it by some crazy standard to try to say that this is the optimal phone for me. Even if the one you chose happens to be the optimal phone, you would have a hard time proving that. So these days, satisficing is the order of the day, and it's certainly going to be true in what we talk about here. If you run into a situation where x still equals 3, that's great, but in our context today, it's going to be much more nuanced. Solution in a broader context, we can put this with two other lenses. These are all valid, useful lenses that we can use to focus on any given system in a given way. So I'd invite you to think about whatever it is you're watching this on and listening to it on, that system. And you can look at that system through the ingredient lens, and you can think about its functions and properties and whether it conforms to specifications. Or you could also look at that in terms of platforms and its interoperability, the synergies with being able to do things like webcast over these devices, extensibility, interfaces, standards. And finally, the one that we want to focus on today, the solution lens, where we're looking at the capabilities of the system. And that is going to be defined as things that the system can do in support of a user's goal and describe the way the user understands it. So this isn't just the mere functions that we saw at the ingredient level. These are much more user-focused things. Also user experience, and in that I take something close to the ISO definition: thoughts, attitudes, emotions, and perceptions of the user before, during, and after use. So that, again, a very high-level holistic look at the solution itself. And bottom cell, their overall utility and the suitability to task. The solution lens is not more valid or more valuable than these other two, but it's the one that seems to catch most people's attention. And there's a pretty natural progression between the ingredient platform to solution from left to right. Many companies I've worked with and for in my career started off with an ingredient focus and then moved to the right as they sought greater autonomy, greater self-determinance within a marketplace, or responded to competition. And you can see that in most of the main, especially in the technology companies today, but it's across all industries. So the migration towards solutions seems to be everywhere present. And I hope that a model like I'm about to show you is going to be a good way to solidify your thinking in those spaces. So within the ingredient platform solution spectrum, focus on solutions, we can introduce these three fundamental perspectives. Business, because our solution has to be marketable, profitable, and affordable. And that means affordable to us to manufacture as well as affordable to the user to purchase. In the usage circle, we want to introduce desirable, useful, and usable solutions. Lots has been written about how badly designed some of these technology projects are and how hard they are to use. can be very frustrating for people, especially as technology continues to invade more and more products. You can hardly buy a picture frame anymore without software running in it. And then technology, that circle is all about manufacturable and functional and consumable. So all of our solutions have to meet these things simultaneously, and that's no easy task. But it gets even richer because we can put these together into a Venn diagram. And this is the uncreatively named three-circle model. In my defense as a mathematician, I will say this is much closer to a real Venn diagram than a lot of the Venn abuse you see out on the web, where people put circles on top of each other but really don't have any meaningful intersections. We are going to talk about the intersections here. We're even going to talk about the boundaries between some of these regions. So this is pretty close to a legitimate Venn diagram. And the thesis here is that the compelling solutions are going to be found in the center and balance all three of these perspectives. If we're out of balance to a significant degree in any one place, this three-legged stool, if you will fall over. And as I mentioned before, sometimes it's that usage circle that's been slighted. And we've got really terrific technology that's profitable and nifty and all that from a business perspective, but the usability is so poor that nobody wants the system. They just reject it outright. But any of these circles could actually be out in the wrong spot and cause trouble for us in terms of the overall solution. So we're going to go through this, and we're going to look at each of the individual circles. And then we're going to look at the three two-circle overlaps and talk about some applications and implications on a solution lifecycle. So that's the map for the rest of our time. To start with, let's look at the individual circles. Each of these circles is going to be described on 2 slides. So we're going to use a Mad Libs approach. It's step and repeat. I'm going to start with business, move to usage, then to technology. Each one of those circles gets 2 slides. One describing the circle itself, the other describing the little flow you see depicted at the edge. So starting with business. Business gives us the economic viewpoint of our solution. And this includes the economic success criteria and our value networks and any other sorts of business models that are associated with the solution itself. So a very important perspective here on the system. But beyond those things that are native to the business circle, what's also here are the economic aspects of things that cross disciplines, like marketing and production. Marketing isn't just an economic aspect. We'll see that in a moment when we get to usage. Neither is production. So these terms are going to close up by the time we get all around the circle. We'll introduce some new ones, but then you'll see that the circles will close there too. The sort of data that I would expect you to be looking at within this business domain are shown down below under the 3 columns. And you notice those 3 columns correspond to the terms that we introduced at the beginning for business: affordable, marketable, and profitable. And these are incomplete lists of the sorts of things that you would do there, but very commonly captured data around this. And I hope you can see all the abbreviations expanded at the bottom. So pretty standard business stuff there. You can probably add to that list, that's fine. Now, the flow within business is the flow of investment. So what happens is that our organization's mission informs strategy that allows us to set objectives against which we make investment. And those investments yield results that have effects. And then the cool thing is that those effects end up changing our mission. Most of you probably can think in your own history, in your career, about how cycles of investment have changed the company's mission that you've been working for. And if you need a ready example for that, some of you are probably old enough, like me with gray hair, to remember when Amazon was an online bookseller. And they've had probably uncountable investment cycles going on to the point where now we have AWS and we sell everything, and there's all sorts of stuff going on that has changed their mission because of the effects of the investments based on their strategy. So it's clear in these flows that objectives and results are evaluative, right? My results tell me how I did with the objectives. But it's also true that the effects of those results validate my strategy. And in the end, my investments have to be coherent with the mission. So there's a lot of sort of cross-validation going on in these cycles. And it is a cycle because it recycles. It's not just some sort of a straight line that ends. All of this is centered on the discipline of finance, broadly named the idea that finance is at the heart of all of this. All right, and our business models are at the core of the data. So same two slides now, move to usage. Usage is the conceptual viewpoint where business was the economic viewpoint. And from this viewpoint, we see the user's conceptual models of the systems and the description of the users themselves and all the associated usage models. So when we have business models, we also have usage models. But beyond those home-based things for usage, where they're completely confined within usage, we also have the conceptual aspects of interdisciplinary things like marketing. Well, there's that word again. We saw that in business. So sure enough, marketing has to do with both economics and the way users think about the system. Because what I'm trying to do is create enough demand in your mind that you part with your hard-earned cash to buy my system. So marketing has to unite both the economic and conceptual aspects of this. And we're introducing design here, which is another interdisciplinary concept. It has aspects of usage, but there's also going to be, we'll see in a minute, an implementation aspect of that one. Data you would collect here is shown in the 3 columns down below, again, corresponding to the 3 fundamental categories we put up on the first slide: desirable, useful, and usable. Now, third step in Mad Libs is to go to technology, and the technology circle, oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, the experience flow. The flow for usage is the flow of experience. A user experience will just shorten to experience. UX, we'll just call it experience because it fits easy on the slide, and most of the people in that domain do that. So experience, let's start out with the outside the system human values that create needs and wants that cause us to set goals for using a system. Most people are very goal-centered when they use a system. They've got a reason for picking something up. It's not compelled of them. And then the experience, thoughts, attitudes, emotions, and perceptions here, lead to some satisfaction of those goals, or not. And the experience qualities end up influencing human values. This, like the flow of investment, is not a ray, but it's a cycle. And one good example of that is the way that we as consumers have altered the way we treat privacy with technology space. And it's only been 15 or 20 years now since back in my prior career, I was with Intel, and I remember the days when Intel suggested in 2000, 2001 that it could use a unique serial number on a CPU to anonymously validate this purchase environment that was in this new thing called e-commerce back then. Remember e-commerce? And some of you may remember what happened when they suggested that they could reduce fraud and make purchases a little more reliable if they did this. Well, the outcry was incredible. You can go back and read in the Wayback Machine, the internet, and see what PC Magazine wrote about that idea and how it was completely excoriated. And fast forward only 20 years, which in an anthropological time is really not very long. And you now carry devices, we all do, that not only know what the serial number of the CPU is, but it knows all kinds of stuff about us. And we're okay with that. And in fact, you might get pretty upset if you had a product that didn't do actively function. It didn't function actively to protect your online persona and your identity and things like that. You think, that's just crazy. How can you not protect me? But it wasn't always that way. So our experience loops change human values and cause trade-offs that might have been unthinkable only a few decades before. All this is centered on users and the associated usage models. When we have a business model around economics, we can have a usage model around user-related ideas. So now, the third step in our Mad Libs is to go to technology, which is the implementation viewpoint. So that means our 3 viewpoints are economic, conceptual, and implementation. So this includes the implementation architecture, the workloads on which the system operates, and various performance characteristics we need from the system, like security. And we have the cross-disciplinary aspects of implementation, like design. Okay, great. Now that means design has elements of conceptual, usage-based concern, and also implementation-based concerns. So yeah, it makes sense. And production. So there's that word we saw back on the business slide. We've closed the loop. Production is a combination of both aspects of implementation and aspects of economics, because it has to be an affordable item to produce. The data in this circle, typically captured or shown below: functional, consumable, and manufacturable. And you see that the consumable is defined in terms of compatibility with infrastructure and services, community standards, things like that. So there's a little nuance to that term, but I think it makes sense in this context. All right, so the last thing to cover is the flow within this circle. And in the technology circle, we're talking about the flow of workloads. Every system ends up operating on workload here, whether we're talking about the ability of a CPU to process various video formats and transcode them, or if we're talking about the way that a college cafeteria has a workload of the number of meals to produce for every student lunch. Technology here in this model certainly works with high technology, but it's a very broad term. Technology and fire, hammer will do at times. You know, you can say I'm using technology of a very basic sort, and the model still holds up. So high technology is a frequent application area, but it's not the only one. All right, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through a ton of this. You've been hearing me walk these circles, but engineering parameters here inform the choice of heuristics. Heuristics are rules of thumb around engineering. And if you hang around for my second talk, I'm going to define engineering very explicitly in these terms in that talk. But we're looking at the flow of workload across the system and the performance of that, and then the tolerance of those workloads. How well does the system respond to both expected and unexpected variation in the workloads and the flow? And it's that ability to tolerate the variance in the workloads that validates our heuristics. So this same sort of cross validation that we saw in the first flow exists in the other two as well. Technology is based on this notion of engineering, centered on engineering. All right, so we have those three major perspectives: business, usage, and technology. We have the viewpoints: the economic, conceptual, and implementation viewpoint. And we have the three flows: the flow of investment, the flow of experience, and the flow of workload across the system. So there's the core of that. With one circle each in mind, let's look at the 3 two-circle overlaps. So I can anticipate here a little bit. We often make this an exercise if we're doing an in-person class. Can't do that here, but I can at least get you to anticipate a bit. What do you think the name is for this little yellow region that's becoming the overlap between business and usage? What is it that would unite the economic aspects of the system with the conceptual aspects? We know that marketable has something to do with this, but that we're only going to use words one spot in this model because we want a good, consistent, unique vocabulary by which we can describe solutions to each other. So that's not it. But you're looking for something that ties together the flow of investment in the system with the flow of experience. And now likewise for the pink segment on the lower right, what is it that unites usage and technology? Taking the flow of experience into the flow of workloads. How do we get the experience tied to the workload? And then at the top, how do we tie the flow of workload back to economics? What is it that's going to take our technologies and turn them into money? So we need words for all three of those. And in the interest of time, and you can't talk, let me just give you what they are. The yellow overlap is value. It's what relates business and usage, tying that flow of investment to the flow of experience and how usage contributes to things like market share and competitive advantage and positioning. Lower right, it's capability that relates usage and technology. You saw that word already when I talked about the ingredient platform and solution lenses. Capability was very prominent in the solution description. Here it is again, capability being the things that the system can do in support of the user's goals, expressed the way the user understands them. And then that thing across the top, what is it that turns technology into money? Well, it's the ingredients of the system. You might have said components, and if you did, very good, excellent guess. There's a reason that we're going to swap that out for ingredient, and the hint is here on the slide. We already have a region that starts with C. So by using ingredient, we have a region that starts with I instead, and that means each of the regions starts with a unique first letter. And that just turns out to be practical because in common use, pretty much everybody starts to abbreviate these regions as BUT, VC, and I. We can't have VC and C. So we're going to call that ingredient, but it's pretty much a synonym for component in this space. So you now have the alternative name of this model. It's often called the BUT model, B-U-T. And if you want to call it that, that's fine with me. Three-circle model can be a mouthful. So business usage technology, the BUT model, and we also have value, capability, and ingredient. Now, in the time we have, I can at least show you some more of the depths of the model. We don't have enough time because this is a long, deep subject to get down to the nitty-gritty, but I can show you some of the detail at the next level down because we know a lot more about that yellow football than just its name. So here, for example, in the value arena, you see a lot more names, and you see it has another cycle. It's not a flow. We're calling this one a cycle. It's a shaded thing, but it's a different one. The economic and conceptual models here unite in this value region. That's the space between the offering business is making to the users and the promise that the users perceive in that offering. So the more space there is, the more value there is. And you can see that the offering and the promise come together and meet the outside world in your organization's brand. Now that brand is the center of the market cycle. Market here is a word chosen to be a verb and noun. It's a thing and it's an activity. And market, this cycle, takes some of the outside world. You can see the blue background inside the yellow dots. And it unites it with the business and usage aspects of the system described in terms of value and focused on your brand. So the way that language works and flows starts to show you some of the foundational strength of this model. There's lots of models that are similar to this, going back all the way to Don Norman's three-legged stool from decades ago. And there have been various other attempts at models with these sorts of overlapping circles. This one is a little different, both in the level of detail. You won't find this kind of detail in the other models. And also, this model has had the crap beat out of it by a lot of smart people over the years, and it's emerged pretty unscathed. The model was in this shape in about 2004, and only minor modifications and improvements have needed to be made to it since then. So if you need something that stands up under scrutiny and pressure, these terms and things are generally going to serve you well. So this is the market cycle centered on brand, and lots comes from this that we don't have the time to talk about here, but you can start to think about, wait a minute, what is our promise? What is our offering for the solution I'm proposing to generate? And how well can we describe this in terms of our brand? And years ago, I used to ask in classes whether or not Harley-Davidson should ever build an electric motorcycle. And yes, they should. That question's now been answered. They're doing it. And performance cars being battery driven. There's lots of things where brands are changing because value propositions are changing again, because our experience is changing. So we can shift to the right and we can look at the capability region in a little more detail, keeping mindful of the clock here. And the conceptual and implementation models here relate through this capability. And here we have capability being the space between an interface and an affordance. We get to technology via some interface. I'm holding a mouse, I'm speaking into a microphone, I'm staring at a monitor, there's a keyboard I can type on. Your car has steering wheels and push buttons, all these systems that are technology-based, you got to have some interface to the technology in general. And those technologies end up being useful to somebody via their affordances. This is a fancy word, but there's no better word that I can find to replace it. So this word's been there a long time. Don Norman popularized this, and even Gibson before Norman. And there's lots of discussion about perceived affordance versus actual affordance. All of that is invoked on this slide. So it's the affordances that permit someone to see what they could do with the system. And to design affordances have to be perceivable or you're in trouble. The interface and the affordance meet the outside world in utility. That's a usable usefulness. And that usable usefulness is the center of the design cycle. But design, again, is carefully chosen verb and noun. So it's an activity and it's a thing. And it unites some of the outside world with technology and usage concerns described in terms of capabilities of the system and focused on utility, usefulness. All right. Third one is the ingredient at the top. And this is the space between the specification and a product definition. The specification typically is like a bill of materials, but it could be for software, for pure software, it's something different, right? It's the build list and all the rest of that. Some form of specification as the way the technology meets the product. Now, those two things meet the outside world in supply, and that's the center of the, well, interesting word, production. English fails us here. The word that would be appealing is produce as the verb, like market and design and produce. But the noun form of that, produce, at least in America, that means fruits and vegetables. And this term's going to have to be a little wider than that. So we settled on production, a little break in the pattern, but I blame English. It's not my fault. So the production cycle unites some of the outside world, like your supply chain and your distribution network, with business and technology concerns described in terms of the ingredients you sell to make money and focused on supply, right? So there's lots of detail here, and I encourage you to download the white paper that's behind all of this, underneath it, and dive into even more depth if you like what you're seeing at this point. My purpose in 1 hour is to convince you to read the white paper because there's lots of good stuff there. So let's shift now to a focus on the entire model and its applications. We now know all the basics. They're shown here except for those three cycles, that the market, design, and production cycle aren't here just for readability. But now you've seen all of this. Great. How do we do this? So this is, we know the solution's got to have all this stuff and it has to make sense. So how do we make this happen? Well, that model is the model of a solution. It is not a life cycle, but it certainly has some implications that are powerful and interesting for a life cycle. And what you see here is something called the Dynamic Solution Life Cycle, DSLC. Life cycles aren't as popular as they should be these days. I gave a talk in front of a room full of product managers, 45 or 50 product managers. And I asked for a show of hands. How many of you actually have a life cycle that you use at your jobs? And 45 or 50 project managers from all over the product space, various sizes of companies, showed me absolutely zero hands. And I was a little disappointed because life cycles actually still have a place. And you may say, okay, you actually have an implicit life cycle versus an explicit life cycle. You're still doing something. So the explicit life cycle here is useful because the flaw that I find in most life cycles that exist out there is that the phase names are sequential activities. My alma mater at Intel, when I first got there, their life cycle had phases of exploration, planning, development, and refresh. And one of the things I did while I was there was help the team that was responsible for agile transformation. And sure, a team using something like Scrum or Kanban walks up to that life cycle and looks at it and says, we don't get it. How do we do this? And I could talk to a general manager with a software staff of 175 and ask, what are your software people doing during the exploration phase? Are they sitting on their hands? No, they're coding. So the life cycle was a lie. Everybody knew it. It just didn't fit. So one of the keys about this life cycle is that it does not name its phases based on what you did. These things are activity independent, and they reflect an evolution that isn't evolving activity. It's evolving proof of what you know about the solution you intend to release. So by now, you've probably scanned the descriptions of each of these states. They're simple. And underneath that, you have a graphical depiction of a couple of states as these three circles sort of come together and collide as to what do we need to know. So you see on the left in the opportunity milestone, I have to have some sort of mass in business and in usage and in technology before I declare an opportunity. If I only have business stuff or technology stuff, I could call it a business opportunity or a technology opportunity, but I don't want to use the word opportunity if I only have one or two of these. I want opportunity to be all three. So we can say, yeah, we have a bona fide opportunity here. There's something interesting enough to spend money on and go and see about. And in the center, if the resolution were even better than it is, you'd see that the outline of the shield in the center, the outline of the solution itself, is very permeable, dashed, and there is no particular definition to the scope inside of it. So my boundary of the system is ill-defined still, sort of hinted at, but not really known. And I really don't know the details of what's in there yet. I just sense there might be something to fit. Moving to concept, you see what's going on. We now have tangency among these specialist regions. So people who are specialists in business, specialists in user and user experience, and specialist technologists are starting to talk to each other in the context of the opportunity and say, I wonder if there is anything that would be a valuable capability. And if there is, can we supply that by some ingredient? And the boundary of the system starts to emerge. Some of the inside details start to become present. You keep pushing forward, value, capability, and ingredient become the focus by the time we're at candidate and developing that material. And the inherent growth in what we know about this proposed solution, to the point where at the solution milestone, we now declare a full, coherent understanding, not only of business usage technology, but also of the value the solution brings, the capabilities that supply that value, and the ingredients that will embody those capabilities into the marketplace. And you see that the boundary of the solution is well understood, and its internal structure is also pretty well defined. Eventually, we get to obsolescence, and you see dissolution of these various elements. Some technologies might be reused, business models get swapped out for something different, usage evolves. Whatever happens, we end up at some point sort of recycling the solution itself. All this based on a consistent vision that pulls your team forward. So this is a pull-based thing. We go where we're drawn. And how did you get through these life cycle milestones? Did you use a sequential approach? Did you use Scrum or some sort of a lean set-based concurrent design approach? Did you use a hybrid of all of those? Sure, maybe you did. The life cycle is not going to constrain you. It's just going to ask some very difficult questions on what can you prove you know about the solution that you intend to release. And you're not going to see milestone promotion meetings that run like so many I've seen in my past, where people come in and then the seats of power look down at you and say, were you busy? And you answer, oh yeah, we were really, really busy in this previous phase. And then what generally happens is you're granted permission to go be busy again, doing some other activity. But you never really prove what you can do and what you know about the solution. It's just, yeah, we were really busy, so that must have been good. Those of you who are Agile practitioners know that this is one of the bases of Scrum and other things is, you know what, every 2 weeks we have to be able to demonstrate we can actually do something that's useful. And this is that kind of carried up to the enterprise level and say every one of these milestones is going to require that you can prove certain aspects of the solution are feasible or valuable or whatever it happens to be at that time. No more, I was busy. All right, so to move toward this kind of a model and be a solution-oriented development organization, what we want to do is look at the new roles required because, all right, the left side opportunity, that's pretty straightforward because I've got business analysts and I have some user experience people in my company if I'm enlightened at all. I hope you are. And sure, you got some technologists. They've made their career making great technology and driving the industry forward. Super. But these other phases, as I'm going to show you here, start to require the red arrows and these roles, these people who start to reach across and collaborate. So at the conceptual phase, we're looking at people who can span at least two of these specialties and talk across the boundary. Because if I'm going to develop a value proposition for a solution, I'm going to need to get across both business and usage. And okay, the other two red arrows are equivalent in those areas. If I'm going to get complete coherence between my value and my capabilities and my ingredients, then I'm going to need people that are good at that. Ideally, I have one brain, the architect, the solution architect, or the chief engineer, whatever you would like to call this person, who understands the coherence among these three things. It's not just that we have a value proposition. That happened in the concept phase. And it started there and maybe fully developed candidate phase. Yes, you have a value proposition. Yes, you have a list of capabilities that are necessary in the solution. Do they line up? Who knows this? Whose job is it to ensure that that stays aligned? And then by the time you get to the solution, you see how hard this gets, because now we're talking about tying all this together and saying that the three regions representing coherence among business and usage and technology and value and capability and ingredient all make sense in the context of a well-bounded, structured solution that we can feasibly produce. And we can confidently produce it because we know we're not leaving value on the table. We know we're not supplying ingredients that have no basis in the system because they match the capabilities that we've decreed are necessary. And then at the even bigger picture in the lower right, we have people who can make sure that our market cycle is coherent and cohesive with our design cycle, and that both of those are in step with our production cycle, because we need to be marketing what we're designing and vice versa. We need to be producing what we're designing and marketing and vice versa, or we're in trouble. So whose job is that? These red arrows can be a challenge at first and think, wait a minute, we don't have a person whose job this is, and that's a good place to go and start to look around with this model and say, where are we strong, where are we weak? And I'll address that as in our applications that come next. All right, so it's not, the three-circle model is not a life cycle, but it has some pretty interesting implications on a life cycle, and it can be used as the basis of an activity agnostic solution life cycle that should permit you to do whatever combination of methods are applicable to your particular solution. If all you do is write software, that means you're going to choose certain things. But if you are a company producing phones or laptops, you could have 15 to 18 ingredients. Some of them are hardware, some of them are firmware or BIOS, some of them are software and services to the outside ecosystem, services to the end user. All those things are different animals, and they can't all be done by exactly the same detailed method, but they can all be done concurrently within the dynamic solution lifecycle. So if that's interesting to you, life cycles do still have a place within your work, as long as you pick one that's modern. This is one of my favorites, obviously. All right, so final topic is to switch to some applications. And lots of these called out in the white paper. We have enough time just to go through a couple together, and then I'll open the floor for questions and see what you've got. So generally, applying this model means you have to be able to walk it in its entirety. I'm using walk the model here metaphorically, obviously. We have to be able to describe all these regions in sufficient depth to ensure we're doing the right stuff right. So we can start just about anywhere. One of the more popular ways to start is with a user-focused idea. Now, I didn't say user-centered, because what's at the center of the three-circle model? It's not users. And that maybe that's heresy to a few of you who are UCD folks. I have no argument against people who are user-centered, because frankly, users have been so neglected for so many years that it's about time we focused on the user. So I'm going to use user-focused. This is a solution-centered model. And by starting with a focus on the user, just the other day in my LinkedIn feed, I saw someone commemorating 20 years or so since Steve Jobs said, you've got to start with the user experience and go back to the technology. That's the only way to do it right. And generally, I agree with that. For a lot of consumer-based systems, that's the way to go. And this picture shows that, where we can start with a description of the users and the user experience there in the orbit around users and the usage model. And we can then start to look at what are the valuable capabilities that our technologies might be able to be used within in the context of our business models. And that might lead us to a set of ingredients that we could actually supply to the market. So lots of ways to walk through that, but this is one very good one. And to get to an even more specific example, let's talk about consumer health. One of the things I did just before I left that career with Intel was I did a lot of mentoring for people who were product managers and product owners and things like that. And I worked with a wonderful person with a PhD in psychology who was investigating various consumer-related health things. And we were looking specifically at things like behavior modification, because many of us can probably attest to the difficulty of weight loss and smoking cessation and other things where behavior modification is tough. I wonder if there's something that we could do as a technology company writing software, making systems that might help people with this. As a particular example, let's think about patients who are discharged from a hospital, elderly patients who are discharged from the hospital for some condition or a group of conditions, and they end up back in the hospital again within 3 months. They're readmitted because they couldn't stick with the discharge plan. They were told what to do and what to measure and how often and what not to eat, but they just couldn't hang with it. So I wonder if there's some sort of a technology solution to this, technology-based thing that makes sense within our business context. So we would go through and say, what sort of behavior modification capabilities, things that would be valuable to the end user, maybe gamification as a capability here, and keep track of my results, show me progress, give me positive reinforcement. Are any of those things valuable? And what about the technologies involved with this? And now the user comes back in focus, because if I'm dealing with elderly patients, then we might have age-related hearing loss, age-related vision acuity problems, cognitive decline, just normal cognitive decline, or even accelerated cognitive decline. What about the business model? Am I going to hand this to a patient on discharge and say, this is yours to keep? Or am I going to have to bring it back and provision it, send it through the mail, clean it up, use it 3 times, or it won't sell correctly? It won't make sense economically for me. So all these considerations come in when we start with user and user experience in a context of this solution setting, work through capabilities and value up through the supporting technologies and the business models that make sense, and end up with a set of ingredients that unite all of this. Because this tablet, if we were going to make it a tablet, it would have to have the right kind of screen contrast and resolution to support any kind of visual acuity problems people might have. And it would have to have the right kind of sound system and all the rest of that. And guess what? It has to support a bill of materials cost that fits the business model if we're going to give it away versus bring it back and reprovision it. So all of those things will come from applying this model within a setting like that. My experience says that if you can memorize just the parts of the model that you've seen so far, practice with a friend over coffee, then you're a pretty valuable person in the conference room, because you're going to be able to, in real time, evaluate terrific solution ideas and crappy ones, and be able to tell immediately what makes some sense or where the tough rocks are in the road, just by quickly applying this model to somebody's concept on a whiteboard or in a PowerPoint slide. So my encouragement to you is to go off and do that. Try to memorize this model at the level where you can draw that poster version of it and name the ideas correctly and explain them to others. And then you'll be able to pull this out of your back pocket anytime you need it and use it. 2 other quick applications and then questions. Fixing a stuck technology. I worked for a technology company, and a lot of times I had people come to me and saying, okay, we need your help. We've spent half our careers working on this terrific technology. I believe in my child. It's a beautiful baby. I've spent half of my career on this thing, and I want to get it into the product, but the people who own the bill of materials say no. They won't let me in the product. And of course, if we go to the other side of that conversation and talk to somebody who's planning a chipset or a CPU or any kind of volume limited thing, even a laptop, there's limited space on hard drives and in BIOS and everything else. So if this person said yes to all the requests, it would be an incredibly big and expensive system. So their general job is to tell people no. And that's the big red line you see in this graphic, is that if I just try an all-out assault from technology or ingredient, I'm going to be told no, because they can't accept all those technologies that would like to be on board. So what do? Instead, remember, we've got to be able to walk the model. That is a heavily fortified boundary. But if we go the other direction and we say, you know what, my technology is involved in capabilities in support of usage that adds value to our business. Now I find that the back door into ingredient is wide open. In fact, there's a place setting with my name on it at the table, and I'm invited to sit down, because I can explain coherently and at enough depth that technology supports capability that's useful and valuable to the business. So that's what you end up having to do. So this this can be applied in various places. If you have a new business model or if you have a new usage model, in all these cases, when you get stuck, you say, wait a minute, why are we stuck? And it's often going to be what you'd call the far side of the model. If you've got somebody as a technologist who has a terrific background in technology and knows exactly what they know about technology, where are they going to have trouble in this picture? Look at the far side of the model over there, and that for them is the value proposition. So they may need some help describing the value proposition of their technology. My user researcher, on the other hand, the far side of the model for her is the ingredient space, and she's not going to quite understand exactly how that usage gets embodied into the particular parts of the device we hand to the patient. So the far side of the model can be a place where you can assist specialists in making this picture whole, and then you know what's going on. All right? Last thing to do, and maybe the first thing to do, last thing to cover, first thing you might do, it's always been interesting to draw this model in outline on a whiteboard, teach people enough about it that they know what the regions mean, and now you know, and then have people put stickies up. Now, these stickies could represent our job skills, or as a different pass, they could represent the sort of things we write down or think we know, or they could describe development activities, anything like that, do one thing consistently. And you'll tend to find that this sort of a distribution happens where you're going to have an area or two where there's a cluster of things, and then you're going to have these deserts where there's nothing. And the question to you is that okay? Should there be something in those gaps? If so, what? What skills do we need? What specifications might we need to write? What knowledge do we need? What activities might we perform to fill those in? So this is a very good way to start making the model work for you in practice, even before you've mastered it to the level where you can apply it. We've done things like apply this to the curriculum from folks like pragmatic marketing or design thinking. And it's easy to map this out and put those useful methods into a broader context and ask, okay, now what about the rest of this diagram? Because it'll cover some, but not all. So that's what I have for you for 1 hour introduction to this, much more detail in the white paper. And open season on questions. If you have them, drop them into chat. I see one, how do I get, more than reading the white paper. Yeah, the process for this, what I would advise you to do is find a buddy and take that buddy to your cafe or to a place where you can talk reasonably and start describing your favorite product with this. If you're a Harley rider, maybe it's your ride, or maybe you really love your kitchen or your camera equipment or whatever it is that you really love, and start describing things like that in these terms. I was not above grilling people in my mentoring sessions on the difference between a ceramic coffee cup and the 3-part Starbucks take-it-away cup with the lid, the sleeve, and the cup. And you say, now let's contrast those two things in terms of the 3-circle model. What are the technologies involved in these? And what about the usage? And what about the economics, the business aspect of this? So the material that you're trying to describe need not be challenging, perhaps should not be challenging as you try to master the concepts in the paper. You ought to be able to talk for 15 to 30 minutes on the economic, conceptual, and implementation aspects of that ceramic versus 3-part disposable, or your camera, or whatever it is. So that's a really good way to go. All right, here's a good one. We have a phase gate lifecycle now, and a lot of teams doing Scrum. Can we adopt the solution lifecycle instead? Yeah, it's going to take some work to get people around to this. For example, the people who approve milestones are probably well set in their way in the power distribution and looking at, I was busy. And you're going to be saying, prove it. And in some cultures, in some contexts, that's going to be an affront. And people are going to say, you don't trust me. I'm wounded. You hurt me. Well, okay, but frankly, get over it, because there's way too much failure in product development even today. Even with 20 years of agile software, we're still not over the hump yet. So yes, you can adopt this. You can do it pretty much from the top down by simply putting the stake in the ground and saying, we are going to start demonstrating what we know about the solution. Simply being busy is no longer good enough. All right, any other questions from all of you? Do explore the paper. There's lots of goodness in that. Okay, here's all the way back to the beginning. I get ingredients and solutions, but can you give us some examples of platforms? Yeah, that's actually a good one, because a platform is, it could be a set of ingredients like a solution, but you saw in that early slide it has different emphasis. Platforms are really defined by standard specifications. So if you want to make an appliance that runs on electricity, on AC in the United States, there's a platform for that. And all the way down to the shape of the plug on the wall, because we've got a plug shape for 110, we've got a different plug shape for 220 volt. And you know that there's a standard specification for what's inside there, so that if you meet that specification, you don't have to actually have a special arrangement with a power company to plug into the wall. It just works. Containerized shipping is another really good one, this multimodal shipment, where your container can go onto a railroad car, a truck back, and a ship, and be lifted by standard cranes and other sorts of tools. Well, you don't have to negotiate independently with every shipping company, every railroad. There's a standard specification for that. The cool thing about platforms is that they also enable a lot of monetization. And there are ways that you can make a lot of money based on the platforms that you include within your solution. Okay, Stephanie, where can you find the white paper? Email me or your favorite Construx person and we will send it to you. There is an ebook copy of it on Google, and you're free to spend $5 on it, but never mind, we'll just send it to you. So contact us afterwards, and we'd be happy to send you that paper. I'm also happy to entertain your questions in email after you've thought about this. If you try to apply it and you run into any difficulty, my email's on the first slide. Don't be shy. I would be happy to talk to you about that. Oh, where are we? 11:22. Yeah, one more question here. Can the model be used outside of business settings? What about education? Yeah, if you're in education, keep in mind that the business circle is about economics. And economics works whether you're in a for-profit or a nonprofit setting. This model's been used quite well, even in places like religious nonprofits. So I've made the model widely enough available that people have picked it up in a variety of settings. And one of my favorites is this nonprofit setting, where people in education or people in even a religious nonprofit, a charity, will pick this up and start using it. Because even if you're a nonprofit, there is some economic aspect to what you're doing. If you do micro grants or micro loans, or if you're handing out free meals and you need donations of various sorts. So all of that's there. All right, we're about out of time. So thank you for attending and your attention. I appreciate your questions and your interest. Do follow up. If you find this useful, I'd love to hear about it. If you have questions on how to apply it, I am here for you. And it's been a pleasure to indirectly address you all. Hope you found it useful.